So I'm Sander. I'm a data platform engineer working for Data Masterminds. I'm a Cloud and Data Center MVP, and I'm a major contributor to the DBA Tools project. I've worked in a variety of industries, from agriculture to healthcare to financial industries. I have about 15 years of experience with SQL Server and then almost 2 decades in IT. You can follow me on Twitter. I have a blog. If you have any questions after this session, feel free to send me an email. I will try to reply as fast as I can. All the demos will maybe show today, or otherwise will be available in my presentations repo on my GitHub page. There are a variety of demos in there. You can use them, reteach them, change them, do whatever you want to do with them. They're yours to do whatever. And now Kevin has a slightly more complicated bio than me, so go ahead, Kevin.
Well, thank you very much for that, Sander. Yeah, on that note, my name's Kevin Chant. I'm a lead BI and analytics architect living in the Netherlands. However, as some of you can probably tell from the accent, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. However, I live in the Netherlands due to the fact my wife is Dutch. So basically, I'm an Englishman, living in the Netherlands, working for a French-based company because he met a woman in Australia. Now, whenever I have to explain this, I realize why my co-presenter says that it's complicated.
Yes, it is.
Now, I've worked in IT since the days of Windows 95, and that's probably as much as I should say about that. And I have experience in various sectors, including the banking, oil, and health insurance industries. Now, I have various certifications as well, including both the new and the old style MCSE. And in addition to that, I've recently renewed my Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert certification, which is fairly relevant for this session. Now, just like Sander, you can find me a few different ways online. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. I have my own blog where I do quite a few posts about doing things with Azure DevOps and GitHub. And I have a few GitHub repositories that might be interesting for some of you as well, for doing things like SQL database and Synapse SQL pool deployments using both Azure DevOps and GitHub. So, our manager has asked that the development and the operations team are merged together so that we all become one big happy family. And in addition to that, the operations team lead, I should say, is going to be the product owner, and the development team lead is going to be the scrum master for the new merged team. Now, in addition to that, just to make things a bit more challenging for us as well, the development team has been using GitHub for quite some time, and the operation team has been using Azure DevOps. And this is just to give this session some context, so we can go into a few further details about things.
In reality, this should be a real gradual process. Like, this could take months before you actually get to implement this. Technically, you can do this in 10 minutes. Process-wise, in your company, this could take months. Because, yeah, it's really hard to get that process right. But we only have 50 minutes, so we're going to try to fit it in.
Yeah. So, just so we know, before we go any further, does anybody work in Agile or Scrum teams here or watching from home at the moment? Okay, so a few people. Yeah. So, for the rest of you who may not know, product owner is basically somebody in the team who's responsible for prioritizing the work items. For example, if you're working in a Scrum-related way, it's product backlog items that they have to prioritize to get people to work on 2-week periods. Can be longer, can be shorter, called sprints. And even though they get input about those priorities, they are ultimately responsible for the priority of those work items.
And the Scrum Master's role is to empower the team to do those backlog items by encouraging how they work or remove any impediments if they appear.
So, when people think about using a tool like a product like Azure DevOps or GitHub to do CI/CD or automated deployments, they think about doing something along the lines of this, where you deploy a collection of services into the cloud. This particular one is based on Microsoft's solution idea for advanced analytics. So as you can see from left and right, you would initially deploy things in a development environment, and then going over to an integration environment for testing, and then you go over to another environment for user acceptance tests. Some teams call it UAT environment, other places call it staging, and then finally into your production environment. Now, does anybody actually do deployments in this kind of way at the moment, or recognize this kind of pattern? So we have a few here, and of course anybody at home as well. So,
however, we can also deploy other things. For example, we are expected to do some database deployments, like you can see right here. The reality is that to do other things, we have to use these other products as well, like managing how we are working with and doing manual tests, for instance. But we have to identify the technology in these products to encourage all our co-workers and our colleagues to adopt them.
Yeah, so basically we have to figure out the best of both worlds. So, first thing we're going to have to discuss, I suppose, Sander, is whether we're going to use the cloud-based versions of these services or whether we're going to use the server-based versions of them. Personally, I'd prefer to use the server-based versions because then everything is retained securely on premises and we know exactly where all the data is, etc. However, slight setback here. Because of how these products are installed, we'd have to deploy across multiple servers. And of course, we want to stick to business continuity, so we'll have to install multiple versions of these servers.
But if we use these servers in the cloud, we don't have to patch and maintain anything. Because everything is done behind the scenes for us. So there's that is going to be easier in a lot of scenarios. Plus, it's easier to install extensions from the marketplace. So this is going to be fun. So there are a few GitHub products out there. So shall we go through each one of them?
Well, I thought there was only the two versions, the free version, and then...
No, there's more than a couple, Kevin. So the first one that we have for GitHub is the GitHub free for user accounts, which is something, this is probably the account that you registered when you first entered GitHub. Then there's GitHub Pro, which has some more features, but again, that is something you have to pay for. You have to click there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It has some extra features like pull request reviewers. Then we have GitHub Free for Organizations, which introduces some other features like team discussions, which is really handy when you want to discuss stuff with your team. And then there is GitHub Team, which is kind of like the GitHub Pro, but then for teams, which also introduces team pull request reviewers. And then we have GitHub Enterprise. And this is the first product from GitHub that can actually be used for either cloud-based or on-premise installations. It has a lot of stuff. So it has GitHub Connect that can be used to connect to your local version, if I can correctly get that. Yeah. And then connect with GitHub Enterprise in the cloud. So, and you can also manage your billing really well with the multiple organizations. And finally, there's GitHub One, which has all the features that we discussed before. But there's also something like insights and advanced security in that.
Hang on. How can security from GitHub Enterprise get any more advanced?
Well, we could implement stuff like if you have public repositories, maybe you've noticed that you get extra features, and we can get those in our private repositories as well, like the code scanning, for instance, which is really handy if you want to see what the quality of code is in your repository. So, anyway, I know we can configure authentication on Azure DevOps, Cloud Services and GitHub Enterprise to store our repositories for Azure Data Engineering using services like Azure Synapse Analytics, right?
Yeah.
So the main point we want you to take away from this section is there are multiple versions of both of them, at least for GitHub and for Azure. We have like the cloud version and the on-premise version, including some really good versions of GitHub that are free. So try them out. If you GitHub free for organizations is really good for small teams, for instance, like 5 or 10 people, and you can really get started getting your stuff into source control. If you install stuff on-premise, you have to take care of everything yourself. So you have to take care of the updates. If you do it in the cloud, everything is done behind the scenes for you.
It's worth noting as well that if you use the cloud-based version of Azure DevOps, actually Microsoft uses Azure DevOps to update Azure DevOps in the cloud. Just an interesting little fact there. So we better go over to how it's structured, I think.
Yeah.
So bear with me, everybody. So, as you can see, hopefully on the screen here, if anybody at home or anybody in the audience thinks that any of the text or anything is too small, then obviously feel free to say join the session. So, of course, my mouse has gone to sleep. So, as you can see here, Azure DevOps has its own structure. At the top, you have the little icon that represents your account. And underneath it on the left-hand side, you can see there's various organizations there. Now, those organizations can be a company you work for, or if you work for a large enterprise, it can be a division within it, or it can be an organization you've created yourself for testing purposes. Now, if you have the right permissions, you can change various settings at the organization level. So if I scroll down here, you can see there's lots of different options. We won't cover all of them today because this is obviously a 50-minute session and we could be here for some time. A couple of key ones that may be of interest. We'll cover processes a bit later on when we talk about work items. And also, if I go down to repositories, just want to highlight the fact that you can change the default branch name now for your new repositories, because as some of you are probably aware, there's a little bit of controversy relating to the origins of the master branch naming convention. So now Microsoft gives you this option. So if I go back to the main account page here, you can see that each organization can have one or more projects. And if I dig into one of these projects, you can see there's a set of default services on the left-hand side. So you've got Azure Boards, Azure Repos, Pipelines, Test Plans, and Artifacts. And just like at the organization level, if you have the right permissions, you can change things at the project level as well. And to be honest with you, Sander, that's probably the level that we'd be working with the most, because that tends to be the case when you're working with Azure DevOps in the real world. You'll have more permissions over the project settings. So, again, in the project settings section, there's a whole array of options here. Some important ones to note are teams, where you put all your teams who are working in the same project together. Team configuration, this will help decide your way of working. Top tip as well, to change between the different teams, just click on the down arrow at the top here, because a lot of people miss that. And various other settings. And in addition to that, there's some user settings you can change as well. One of them is personal access tokens. And these are special keys, basically, secrets that you can create that can help with authentication issues that you may potentially have. And Sander will highlight a similar one in GitHub in a bit, because that can also help with some issues.
Yeah. I've got a question, Kevin, because this is kind of cluttered, right? Can I disable any of these services if I'm not using them?
Yeah, sure. If you go to the overview section and scroll down, you can turn the various services that are used by these projects on and off.
Ah, that's awesome. So if you're not using any of these items, you can just disable them, and then your overview will be way cleaner.
You can also extend them as well.
Yeah. So let's go in and do a similar thing for GitHub.
I think they need to see your screen.
Yeah, I know. But I need to switch the page. There we are. This is my pretty face. Well, pretty. So if I go into the user settings, I'm not going to go through every single user setting because you can figure that one out on your own. But a couple of things that you probably want to look into, and I'm a big favor of this. Go into security, password and authentication as far as I know, and enable two-factor authentication. That's the first thing you should do whenever you register anything. Go into and get 2FA enabled, because I don't want anybody to steal my repositories, because I've got quite a few in there. So some other things you probably want to take a look into is you can actually put really interesting. You can add a successor to your account, right? So if you decide to go and leave, you can just give that entire account to someone else, and they will get all the repositories, which is really cool. I can see all my repositories in here. I can actually leave different public ones if I want to. Code and security analysis, which is probably going to be easy, really handy for you later on if you want to do checks. And code spaces is interesting. Packages as well. And where was that little part for the password authentication? So we can put that in. I can't find it right now. I've got a brain for it right now. SSH moderation. Oh, and I can block Kevin if you want, if he's being really annoying with me. So I can just block his account and never being able to get in. So. So let's go. Oh, not go too fast. And that's about.
You're getting very excited.
Yeah, because I want to get you out of my repositories. So next part is
The project
organization settings. So if we go in, and I can actually show you from here, I am a member of multiple organizations. I'm not allowed to change any settings on the majority of them, but we have an organization that that I'm a member of and have the right privileges. So if I go into the settings, again, I'm not going to go into all these, but probably one that's important is the billing and plans. Take care that you figure out like what's happening with your account, how much is being used. Some other things like member privileges. What's the base privileges if somebody's added? Team discussions, which I mentioned before. You can enable or disable this. It's really handy to use for your team. I would enable this by default. You can really do cool stuff with webhooks in there. GitHub pages. Which is really handy. I've been using it privately to create my own blog with Hugo and all those kind of things. So you can actually post stuff to your GitHub pages, get everything built, and get a website running. So it's really cool. Authentication and security, again, you can set this on a project level, and you should probably set this on a project level. So that is the project settings.
Is that the project settings?
Or not the project settings, that's the organization settings.
You're getting way ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
Now you're going to do the project settings.
So let's go into the repositories. And it's going to be really similar, but just bear with me. So there we are. This is my project. Basically, it's the repository. And I can go into the settings right here. And this is just a cut-down version from the organization. I will have less items in here, and this all depends on your privileges anyway.
It's worth noting as well, because obviously it was something that we skimmed over a bit earlier. Those of you who haven't used GitHub for a few months may have noticed that all the settings sections have been changed ever so slightly now, so they're a little bit easier to use than they were, and a bit more visually appealing.
Yeah. I was actually kind of shocked, like, whoa, they changed this suddenly. Like, okay, cool.
So I think the main thing we want you all to take away from this is that both Azure DevOps and GitHub are highly customizable. And that varies on a few different factors, including which versions of both products you use. Like we said, GitHub does have an enterprise version that you can use that has a lot more different things you can do. This is purely for an introductory basis. So
let's go into
version
control. So, so now we've covered basically the main admin stuff. We're going to go into version control, which is where we're going to save everything, right? So
can we just use the same applications that we were using a couple of decades ago?
Well, something tells me that we have something a little bit more modern like that. So what's the oldest version of or kind of SCD application anybody worked with? Mine was SourceSafe, but
you saw a hand pop up.
I'm really happy that Microsoft discontinued that because that was horrible. So, well, and we're going to use something a little bit more modern, right, Kevin?
I suppose so. So, yeah. So, Azure DevOps actually has a service called Azure Repos, which I can show you now. And I did mention it earlier when I was introducing the projects. So basically, depending on what type of, which version control you decide to use when you create a project, by default, Azure Repos, you work with Git repositories, and this is a visual representation of one. However, especially for my co-presenter, because I know he's a big fan of it, I also earlier created another one for Team Foundation version control. And I just wanted to highlight the difference here. As you can see, there's just a few different things that you can do.
It's only for legacy things, right?
Not necessarily. Some people still want to use Team Foundation version control for things. I know the one thing that a lot of people actually like is the fact that you can import from Team Foundation version control directly into Git. And it's fairly easy to do, but we won't show that here because, again, it is only a 50-minute session. So back to this. And like I said earlier, visual representation. So you can see all your files here, your commit history, any pushes you've done, the branches that you're using, and we'll talk a bit more about branch strategy shortly. Tags and pull requests. And like everything else in Azure DevOps, this is customizable and flexible. And for the majority of these services, like Sander said earlier, you can extend by putting in extensions from the marketplace. So, maybe we should use Azure Repos, Sander.
Well, to be honest, Kevin, a lot of the developers are actually really proficient with GitHub. So let me go through GitHub quickly because that is actually.
I'm guessing you want to switch the screens as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna, but just bear me a moment because otherwise people are not gonna see the proper screens. So this is a typical repo, which basically what GitHub does is it shows you the files right away. This is where everything lives for where you actually can see your code. We have several parts of GitHub where we can do the issues, the pull requests, again discussions which I mentioned before. Actions, which we're going to demonstrate later on. Projects, which is also going to be a demo, but you can actually separate the projects, and there is something new we're going to mention later on, like GitHub issues, which is a different way to get your issues into Git. Of course, there's a wiki, which is also in Azure DevOps, but I like the one because this is all Markdown, and I've had some trouble with Azure DevOps with the wiki.
Don't know what you're talking about.
And again, there's security stuff that we can do. So that is basically what a repo in GitHub is. It's not more than that.
And I suppose you're going to give me back the screen.
Yeah, I'm already there.
So let's do a demo, shall we, of something. We said earlier we would explain to everybody why we'd use the dot for a demo. So who here uses GitHub in one way or another at this moment in time? I suspect a couple of you.
Oh, quite a few.
Has anybody tested pressing the dot button on your keyboard whilst in your repository yet?
No?
Well,
it's actually quite fun.
Well, should have had a camera with a zoom on so people can see I'm only just pressing the dot button. So what you can do is just literally press the dot, period, whatever you want to call it, button, and it will open up, and a lot faster than I could actually get there. It opens up a lightweight web editor, actually within GitHub Online. So let me just get the mouse pointer towards the top of the screen to show you. We are still in the browser. This isn't on your machine, so you can have a cloud dev environment, and you can move around, and you can use this wherever you are too. If you swap from machine to machine, for example, this will still work, which is really good. So you can actually make changes in this code editor, pull requests, etc., and then just go back to your GitHub repository as normal. So that's something we wanted to show you all here. So after this session, you can go into your GitHub repositories, press that dot button, and test it for yourselves.
That's really cool, because that really helps you to make changes quickly. You don't need to install anything, just the web browser.
Indeed, and in addition to that as well, there is actually a new feature that's with GitHub as well called Code Spaces. Some of you may have heard of that. And you can actually use a similar concept for this as well, with basically very powerful virtual machines behind the scenes.
Cool.
Well, that requires a couple of different versions of GitHub licenses, so.
Figures.
Anyway, I suppose we better go back to the rest of the content for this section.
Yeah, sure.
So, what about branch strategies? Because I hear they're pretty important.
Well, they are. So if you start using Git or anything like that, Git is just bare. You don't have anything like a branching strategy, not policies, by the way, branching strategies.
I said strategies.
And so you have, how do you set up the entire Git infrastructure, like all the branches, for your processes? So there are a couple ones that we have. We have, for instance, we have the Git flow, we have the GitHub flow.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, what's the difference between those two? Because they sound pretty similar to me.
Yeah, they are pretty similar. So what happens with the Git flows, that you have like a main branch, and then you have a development branch, and then you have releases and hotfixes and feature branches. And they all get, you merge from, if you make a branch from development into a feature branch, and then it goes back into a release, and then goes into main, and that is kind of hard. I see a question. Say that again?
How fully fledged is the GitHub.dev environment?
How fully fledged is the GitHub?
I don't know if it's spell a mistake, but GitHub.dev.
GitHub.
Do you mean in terms of features?
So the question was, how fully fledged is the GitHub.dev environment?
Well, it's a cloud dev environment, so it is literally a cut down version of Visual Studio Code. So there are limitations. It comes with a handful of extensions by default. So yeah, it's not a fully fledged version of Visual Studio Code.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So I was with the Git flow, right? So with the GitHub flow, there's only like there's the main branch, and there's only feature branches. And when a feature branch is done, it gets merged into the main branch. And there are pros and cons to both of them. And another one is the GitLab. So with GitLab, you kind of they got the GitHub flow, and then they extended it to environments. So you can set environments like staging, production, dev, and it has like a waterfall method of developing. So you go from one environment to the other, which could be a benefit to you, to your processes as well. So you are not restrained to how you set this up, but you should do this in the beginning to make sure that everything is documented and where each branch should happen. Branching is something that happens a lot in Git, and you should. So going back, so I got that. So Kevin, us devs have been doing source control for many years. So if we do something like pair programming, dev and ops can actually get used to it. Who knows about pair programming? One, two. Do you know?
I've heard of it.
So with pair programming, and with code situations, it's kind of hard to do, but you would sit next to each other and you would write the same code together. And you would learn, it has a couple benefits because you learn from an experienced programmer. Sometimes another coworker has another insight. And you can actually learn new coding practices better. So it's actually...
So what you're basically saying that the ops team are going to have to adopt it as well and start using pair programming.
Yeah, I think they should. So I've been using Git as a DBA for many years because I want my scripts to be in source control everywhere. My scripts don't live on a disk somewhere or on a USB stick. I just want to share that throughout the IT department. So you should probably do that.
Okay, so what is to stop somebody coding their own release and pushing it straight to the main branch?
That's a good question, Kevin. So there's something called branching policies, which is really important. So you can set rules for both in Azure DevOps and in GitHub to make sure that nobody is able to merge into the main branch without any approval, for instance. And you have to do that for being SOX compliant, for instance. So you have to have 2 reviewers for the same pull request. So it's really important to set these up. And I'm going to show that, right?
You're going to try to do it in GitHub. I know how to do it in Azure DevOps, so how do you do it in GitHub?
So how do I do that in GitHub?
And what Sandra's doing today, so to be SOX compliant, part of being SOX compliant, you need to have what's known as a 4i principle in place. So that's what Sandra was mentioning just now. If you go into there, set it for 2 people to review the code.
So I am going to go in. I'm going to show on my screen. So if I go to the branching policies, or in the settings, I go to branches, right here. And there are branch protection rules. It's basically, in Azure DevOps, they call it branch policies. In GitHub, it's branch protection rules. And I can add a rule. And I can even I can specify the name like main or dev or anything that, or I can use a wildcard, like an asterisk. And I can set that I require a pull request before merging, and then I can set the required amount of approvals. And I can set this to the amount of 2. And there are other settings that I have to do to be SOX compliant, for instance, but you need to check these to be sure. You need to set this up in your branches to make sure you are compliant with any kind of policy that you have. So you're going to show that in Azure DevOps, right?
Not in this particular session.
Oh.
So, anyway, I think you're going to also show me something else relating to the search capability as well.
Yeah, so...
And everybody else, of course.
The search in GitHub is pretty fast. You actually, if I put anything like Microsoft, don't type in Demo Center, never goes well. And I want to look for all GitHub. I can actually find a lot of stuff. Can I use the docs? Is that in there? Azure Docs. There we go, jump to that. And it's really fast. I just searched millions of repositories in an instant. So it's really powerful. From here, I can look up all kinds of repos, fork them, clone them, do everything I want to do with them. So you saw how fast that was. So.
And rumor has it as well, it's actually based on another database engine. Okay, we'll quickly move forwards on that note. But since you've brought all of this up, I suppose we will use GitHub for our repositories of the new team.
I would really advise doing that.
Okay, well, if you press the button, it'll flip back over.
Yeah, I will.
And I suppose the next thing to discuss is work items, because you know we're going to have to manage the work for the whole team. So how does it work in GitHub?
So in GitHub, I mentioned this before, we have something called issues. And this is for every single repository. And you can add your own issues, and it's not really an issue. It can be a feature or anything like that. So we can put a level of automation on them using tags, for instance, and it's really simple to use because GitHub, people have been using this in GitHub for years. So I'm going to go in and go to the projects. And again, we're going to switch screens. So I'm here. Yes, this goes really smooth, by the way. Way better than before. So if I go to my projects overview, go to my project. So here are my issues, and I can just create a new issue, and then give it a title, do anything with it. I do recommend using templates, because if you want to have the correct information using issues. So you can set up a template that a user has to fill in, like have you checked this? Are you on the correct version? Are you, etc. And then you get all that information and it gets sent to you. But we have something new called projects, right? So we can go into projects.
Well, technically it's called GitHub Issues, but yeah, it lives inside projects.
Yeah. So if I go in, and this has been public beta by now, and if I open this, it's different. So instead of using like a Kanban kind of way, like with the columns, this is in a table format. And
you can still use the Kanban with this?
No, you can. I'm going to show that after this. So if I go, I can create new issues, just add the plus, and then I can add an issue from a repository and anything like that. It has all the same kind of view. You can make multiple tabs with different views, for instance, that you can, for instance, filter for specific reasons.
And additional columns as well, I do believe.
Yeah, you can. So if I go back and go to my, of course, I can't really get this going. There we go. Just going back to a repository. We can actually go in and look at the projects. And if I create a new project, add a project, come on. No, add a new project.
Well, I tell you what, to save going through all of this for everybody, because I suspect we may end up using Azure Boards instead. So can I quickly go through that?
Yeah, sure.
So if you just go back in a minute to, and I'm going to go back in here. So also, Sander, we have Azure Boards as well, which is quite a bit more of a mature product, so to speak, than GitHub Issues, and fairly flexible. We got the work items where you show your stuff in a linear format. You got the boards that allows you to work in a Kanban, Scrumban way, backlog view, and the sprint view, and the queries. So, sorry, that was a bit too fast. So, I think maybe we should use Azure Boards for now, and we can actually work. If I show you here very quickly, we can actually integrate GitHub repositories into boards as well.
That's cool.
And one other thing that we can, 10 minutes. So one other thing as well, we can actually show details from both Azure Boards, and I'll zoom in here, and GitHub repositories together in a Power BI report.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So I thought I would quickly show that for everybody here. So
nice.
I suggest we use Azure Boards on that front.
GitHub has come a long way with doing all the project organization, but Azure DevOps have been doing it has been developed for more than a decade, so it's more mature to do these kind of things.
So we're going to do a quick overview, I think, now about the pipelines in both.
Yep.
So basically, we have two options, either to use Azure Pipelines or to use GitHub Actions. So if I can quickly show you here. So in Azure Pipelines, you have various ways to do deployments. You can either use YAML files, or you can still use the classic editor to do your builds, and then use the releases feature to do your releases in a GUI-based format. However, as some of you may be aware, what is now pipelines in Azure Pipelines used to actually be called builds, is now called pipelines to reflect the fact you can use YAML pipelines, so infrastructure as code. So you can put your YAML files directly in your repository, and it can move around. However, I do believe that GitHub has something similar now.
So GitHub has something called GitHub Actions, and it works with workflow. It's only YAML based, so there's no like the classic editor that Azure DevOps has that I really don't like. So, so we have workflows in there, which is basically the same as what we can do with Azure pipelines.
So I suppose then I will show how Azure. I will quickly show how GitHub Actions look now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So we got 3 minutes left to go. So basically, you will define all of your actions as workflows, and you put those into YAML files inside your repository. And if I click on here, you can see it's just a lot of YAML code. I can click on Edit, and that will bring up the dynamic marketplace. If you look on the actions here, you can see we've done some deployments in this particular one in the past. This is for a complex deployment now, so let me have a look and see if I can find one that's a bit more simpler. So here we have SQL deployment, and there should be one that says, okay, state-based one there, and there's a migration one as well. So actually, if we go back to this one, so I just realized earlier that I did make it a bit less. Now you'll see this very small screen here. Don't panic. What happens in GitHub Actions, you try and squeeze it all in. So it's just to give you an idea how you use it to do a big deployment. So that's how it works. And it's not all done behind the scenes for you in the cloud. It actually uses something called runners as well.
Yep.
So if we go over to the runners section here. So these runners that GitHub uses are basically tend to be servers that are running a service. And these runners are actually the workhorses behind all your deployments in GitHub Actions. So they do all the building of all the artifacts and the deployments using the releases. Now there's two types you can use, Microsoft hosted or self-hosted. I think we're going to have to use the self-hosted unless we want to tweak a lot of firewall settings, etc.
Performance-based, that's probably a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you just install it as a service locally, and obviously we've.
The runners, by the way, are images, and they are both the same for both for GitHub and Azure DevOps. So if you have like the image for GitHub, it's going to be the same kind of thing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's going to be the same thing for Azure DevOps.
Yeah, so, as you can see here on the screen.
Yeah.
So, and if you go into my GitHub repository, or in my GitHub online, you actually see there's various templates you can look at to do SQL and Synapse deployments using both Azure DevOps pipelines or GitHub Actions. So feel free to look on there. Usually we tend to do a live demo, but for the benefit of time today, we're going to go past that part. We'll show you very quickly how it looks in Azure Data Studio, though. So if I can show you here, and then we will finish the rest. So there you go. Anyway.
Oh, we'll make it.
Yeah, we got 4 minutes. So for manual tests, well, there is no manual test functionality really in GitHub. So I think we're going to have to stick to using Azure Test Plans.
Yeah, which is a great feature, by the way.
Yeah. Now, if you have certain things like a Visual Studio subscription, you can actually create the test plans in Azure Test Plans. Or, of course, if your company has purchased basic and test plan licenses. If you don't, you still have the ability to run these. I recommend running them as a web application. So, that's that.
So, we're going to briefly discuss artifacts. This is where we're going to save all our stuff that we've built. So, I think this is going to be a tough call, Kevin.
I think since we're using the GitHub repositories and we're using GitHub Actions, and we've decided to use GitHub Actions, I think it kind of makes sense right now to use try the GitHub packages. However, if we do keep having issues there, we can always connect up and look to use Azure Artifacts down the line. For example, if we need large binaries, we can use universal packages. Now, we did mention earlier that there's the wiki in both, and I'm looking forward to using both of those. There's also dashboard functionality in Azure DevOps you can use, which is quite useful. And for the developers especially, there's CLI functionality for both, so you can install an Azure DevOps extension for Azure CLI. And you can use the GitHub CLI as well, which has recently been updated to include stuff for GitHub Actions as well. And there's also mobile apps. And I have to admit, I prefer the GitHub one.
Yeah?
There you go.
Oh, okay.
So, just to confirm for us, everybody here, and everybody at home, what services we've agreed to use. So we're going to use Azure Boards to manage our work items. GitHub to manage our repositories.
Yep.
And then from there, we're going to use GitHub Actions for CI/CD deployments with a chap who's dressed in red and blue. Looks very familiar. Then we're going to use GitHub Packages to store our packages. And then we're going to use Azure Test Plans to manage our manual tests. And if there's a problem, report it as a bug. And by the way, if you want to use Azure Test Plans, you need to make sure Azure Boards is enabled, otherwise it doesn't work. And then we're going to put our metrics into Power BI.
Cool. So now we know everything that we've done. Where shall we begin?
Well, I suggest that we start by getting both teams together, explain what we're trying to achieve, and get everybody on board, because that's the most important part when you're going to merge teams like this together.
That's going to be the toughest thing to do, to get everybody on the same page.
And if you could just a reminder for you all to give us feedback. I think we've got a very short period of time. We've got 1 minute left for questions, if there are any from anybody. Why we chose, the question was, can we explain why we decided to choose GitHub Actions? And it was because we had the repositories in GitHub, and we decided to keep the CI/CD activity close together. However, it is worth noting that you can have GitHub repositories as a source in Azure pipelines as well. So they are interchangeable. However, for the benefit of this particular session, we decided to keep them both within GitHub.
It's just really easy to trigger.
Same about that part, the CI/CD pipelines and actions in GitHub. How do you take care of the gateway functionality?
How do we take care of the gateway functionality?
Do you mean for the approvals?
Yeah, approvals, but all kinds of other stuff.
That's fine. And I can actually show you this right now.
Kind of running over, but
When we have
Most is
somebody
gonna be
walk
okay.
in, then we will quickly go. So, for here, what you can do in the settings, you can create what's known as environments. And as you can see here, we've got an environment called production, and we set that to be reviewers. And then when you create your YAML code in that workflow I showed you earlier, you can actually set the environment in there. So if I can scroll down and try and find environment.
there it is.
So here you go. So I just quickly zoom in. So that is how you set the gateways up.
And it will stop at that point until it's approved.
This is a bit more limited compared to what you can do with environments in Azure DevOps. However, the functionality is there and it's been developed. And if you look on it over time, you'll see new updates. I'm being told it's fully time.
Any more questions? Otherwise, we're going to be around here. Yeah? Can we have a link to the slide?
I will make
deck?
a link to the slide decks available after today. So yes is the answer. So if you can provide us feedback as well, we'd much appreciate it. And here's our contact details again in case anybody wants to reach out to us. We're both around for the rest of the event, and that includes obviously everybody watching at home as well. So yeah, and that's it. All that's left to say is thank you all very much for attending this session, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of SQLBits.
Okay.